Hello, everyone, and welcome to another LinkedIn Live discussion brought to you by Optiv, the cyber advisory and solutions leader. It's almost Halloween here in the US, which means we are approaching the end of October as well as Cybersecurity Awareness Month. In today's session, we will reflect on cyber best practices that everyone in your organization can leverage all year round. I'm Sarah Faraji, a technical content manager here at Optiv, and I'll be moderating the discussion. And I'm thrilled to be joined today by our CISO, Max Shire, and our practice manager for the attack and penetration team, Billy Giles. To our audience watching us live, I'm welcoming you to the chat. Please feel free to participate at any point. We're going to be asking a series of questions. And the first question that I'd love to ask you in the chat is, what is your most recommended cybersecurity tip? So feel free to share, and then we will be reading and answering your questions live. Thanks for adding that. So if you have any suggestions for anyone in the business or people on your team, any tips that you think would be beneficial, glad to hear them. And so kicking off the discussion with our panel, I want to open with a question on cybersecurity training. So Max, starting with you, as someone who helps lead our organization's mandatory cybersecurity training initiatives, don't forget to take those if you're in the organization, the training deadlines are coming up. What do you see as the core building blocks of security training for any organization?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yes, to the Optiv Nation, please complete your security awareness training. Or if you have security awareness training due at your companies, please do it. Yeah, and to your points here, I think security awareness training just can't be a checkbox exercise. It really needs to be relevant and timely to the employee population. And I will say that one thing at Optiv we try to do is we try to change our security awareness training every 6 months, which is the frequency that we use it. And in fact, in the latest one, we've talked about, privacy concerns, which is a big thing with a lot of privacy laws being implemented, but also AI training and what's the safe and ethical use of AI and what's the corporate policy surrounding it, which is also timely and relevant. And I think, just normal security awareness training too, you can't let it be stale and stagnant, right? It has to change with the times. And so, if you've been doing the same security awareness training for the past 3 years, it's probably time to look at changing it. I mean, I'll be honest, as you can see from my background, I used to be military, and in the military, we had this DoD cyber awareness training, and I swear it was the same training for like 10 years. And so what benefit are you going to get out of it if you've been doing the same training for 10 years? It's literally a checkbox at that point. You're not paying attention. You already know what the answers are. You're just going through the motions, right? So keep your employee base engaged. I don't want to say gamification. That's kind of a big thing nowadays, but, trying to find ways to keep your employee population engaged in that training, making it timely and relevant, I think are probably the three most important things that you can do with cyber awareness training. And then do it on a regular basis and change it up on a regular basis. I don't think that it has to be a checkbox exercise. Find ways to get your employees to provide comments and feedback on the training, and maybe incorporate those into your training moving forward, so that way they can see that they can participate in the development of the training too. And then secondly, I think it's also important to incorporate, maybe live phishing exercises that you get, into your Proofpoint tool or whatever email gateway that you have, and use those real threats as a template that you can send out to your employee base too, and really make it more real, right? Make it more realistic, and tell the employee base, hey, look, these are the types of threats that we're getting. And so I'm going to turn around and make it a template to train you, so that way we're better prepared and to better defend the company.
Yeah, this is awesome advice. And I love a data-driven security training plan. And I know that Optiv's phishing simulations are increasingly realistic, and it's difficult to discern those emails from those that you might get from your manager or something. And I know we've seen some that are mimicking our branding and things even in the email templates and whatnot. So they're getting more realistic. They're challenging. Like you said, not a checkbox. The laws are changing. The threats are changing. They're very dynamic. So we have to keep up with our training as well. And Billy, from your perspective, as someone who takes on a simulated role as a cyber adversary and red team operations, what do you see as the most important opportunities for training or growth for security teams as well as for the public?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really great question. And I think Max's answer was fantastic, but I'll just add a bit to that, right? So I think the most important thing, also from a previous military guy, is to make sure that the training is realistic. And when Max described how he's taking, phishing emails that he's seeing in the wild and then replicating those internal, I think that's fantastic. I do think that computer-based training has a little bit of a role, right? It's a baseline to make sure that everybody at least gets a baseline of training, but incorporating those practical scenarios to reinforce learning is, definitely worth the investment. And to take it one step farther, I would say you need to do those outside of your computer-based training, because I've seen kind of the evolution, right? That it started with a 1 hour video kind of thing. Maybe you have some knowledge checks. And then the next iteration was, maybe that 1 hour with knowledge checks, and then the knowledge checks included some sample phishing emails. But the way that Max has approached this and his team with, testing us year round internally with real phishing emails that we're seeing in the wild, I'll be honest, I clicked on one. It was a marketing email, looked like it was from Optiv, and it was, hey, update your signatures using the latest, Optiv approved stuff. And I clicked on it, and it took me to a landing page that asked for my credentials. And that's when I realized, hey, I'm already signed in. This should not be asking for my credentials. And I backed out of it at that point. But I mean, as a guy who creates phishing emails, if I can get caught by it, then anybody can get caught by it, which kind of takes me to my second point, which training is important, but it also has to be part of your layered defense strategy, right? Human beings are going to make mistakes, and you still need to have those technical controls in place to backstop those mistakes.
Absolutely. And I love that you're thinking about kind of multimodal training programs. I mean, there's potential with, of course, the video is helpful, but these real time and realistic simulations are super helpful and ways for us to get engaged and involved. We can do physical security tests for those that work in person, and there's a lot of different layers and things that we can explore with that training. That's again not just that a cyclical checkbox. We need to be seeing them when we wouldn't expect them or in the daily flow of emails or other types of tasks. Yeah, so the next question I want to ask is, we're sometimes seeing that there's an interest in cybersecurity training and awareness, of course, this month and throughout the year, but at the same time, we don't always see a significant investment in cybersecurity training. So according to the Ponemon Institute's 2024 Cybersecurity Threat and Risk Management report that was sponsored by Optiv, 59% of survey respondents said that their 2024 budget increased from the previous year, but 39% of respondents indicate that their organizations plan to invest in security training for employees. So, starting with Max, thinking about that stat, if organizations have limited budgets available for training, what advice do you have for prioritizing and strengthening security training initiatives?
Yeah, and I think this is a two-part question, right? I look at security training for professionals as separate than security training for your employee base, and honestly, there's two different approaches there. And I think Billy is going to talk about maybe security training for his red team and some of the other professionals on his team. But I will say this. Security awareness training doesn't have to be expensive. There are ways that you can implement different type of training scenarios, brown bag lunches, webinars, other things that you can do as a security professional that doesn't cost money. It's just time, right? Time and effort. And, I will say that CBT, to Billy's point, it has its place. But for the company to see you and to see the security team and to see you advocating for security and getting your name out there and getting your face out there, advocating for security is worth its weight in gold, right? So you can push all of the elaborate training that you want out to the employee base, but I think having that genuine webinar where people can interact with you, ask questions, get answers, and really just be there as an advocate for security and know that you're not there as a speed bump or a roadblock is worth more than, a $50,000 training program where you're training or, changing out training every 6 months, right? Be engaged, be involved. And again, that doesn't cost any money except for your time and effort. When it comes to, I guess, security training and investment when it comes to security professionals, I will just say this. It's important and you need to keep up on it. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Billy.
Yeah, just to add to that, like, so approaching it from the perspective of, someone who is responsible for training red teamers or someone who has an internal SOC and needs to provide training for them. I think the most important thing that we have to remember is that as cyber threats evolve, cyber training has to evolve alongside those threats, right? It's a constant, I always say it's a cat and mouse game, but it's a constant evolution of, new defenses are put in place. So attackers find a way to bypass those defenses, always leaning towards the human, which is always the weakest element, right? But I think as leaders, we all have to understand that that evolution is constantly ongoing. And we have to be willing, if you employ either red team or blue teamers, you have to be willing to ensure that you have an adequate training budget that folks can learn those new TTPs or how to defend against them. And then on the other end, if you're a consumer and you're trying to request training up through your management, the most important thing that I think you need to be able to do is describe the risk or the opportunity cost of not taking that training, right? So if there's a new TTP as a red teamer or as a leader of red teamers, if I don't make sure that my team is trained on and understands how to do, the risk is we're not uncovering those vulnerabilities for our clients who are hiring us to try to exploit those vulnerabilities. So I always try to talk in risk, and Max is probably very familiar with that, trying to sell the cybersecurity budget internally. But yeah, that would be my biggest thing for trying to advance training for red and blue teamers.
Yeah, and Billy, I will add to that too. And I think a lot of security teams may miss this, but if you're ripping and replacing a security tool, make sure that you bake in training for your security team for that security tool. Not having that line item in the purchase is going to be a detriment to the team. There's always going to be a lead up time, but being able to have that training, that hands-on training prior to the implementation of that tool will reduce lead up time, spin up time, and to Billy's point, really help reduce the risk with the transition of that security tool. So I think it kind of goes hand in hand with your security team and making sure that they have adequate training so that way they can adequately respond to the new TTPs, the new threats, etc. But also that they're adequately trained to utilize the tools that you do have in your security stack. And I think that's just as important as keeping up on current threats. Makes no sense to implement a new tool if you don't know how to use it, or if you're going to be sitting there for 6 months stumbling through trying to use the tool, and that obviously could cause issues, could cause you to miss incidents and really raise the risk.
Yeah, and I think that's important. The training is not only important for the internal mandatory security training, but also when we adopt new security tools and whatnot, making sure we have the adequate training so that our security teams know how to use them well and that we can make the best use out of that tool. And I'll add on to what Billy was saying as well about how we always see humans as the biggest risk. The human factor is the biggest risk and the biggest factor in cybersecurity data breaches and whatnot. But we can also explore how how humans are our biggest cybersecurity awareness enabler. They're the ones who, when we do different things in the organization, whether it's that brown bag lunch or a newsletter, whatnot, they're the ones who are really empowering, communicating with, and supporting others in the organization to adopt great cybersecurity best practices. I'll just say, as someone who worked in cybersecurity training myself for a few years, I find that cyber training is really just like any other area of the business where you need to connect your team's goals to business goals and illustrate the ROI. So that can be challenging when the outcome is to reduce risk, and you might have difficulty quantifying that, but you can still do a lot with a little, just like Max was saying, by focusing more on communication, continuous improvement, by soliciting feedback from existing training initiatives and evolving existing training to be more hands-on and relevant. You can really make a big difference in the overall effectiveness and the resonance of that security training. So let's see also what people in the audience are saying. Some different tips that we have. Have 2FA, absolutely, multi-factor or two-factor authentication. Be careful clicking the links on suspicious emails and texts. Yeah, that's a good point about texts as well. We talked about emails, and and the emails are evolving. It's not just the typical emails with a lot of misspellings and things. Now with different artificial intelligence, other tools, those emails can be more sophisticated and whatnot. And so we really have to look more carefully at these emails as well as text messages. And we also see cover the security basics before looking at the latest shiny tool. Yeah, we talked a bit about kind of tool when we're adopting new tools and making sure that you have the basics. I think that's a great tip. And yeah, so these are awesome discussions and awesome suggestions. So, cybersecurity training is just one piece of enhancing security awareness. Another area involves establishing security controls. So, reflecting on the Cybersecurity Awareness Month theme, CISA suggests using strong passwords. Now is a great opportunity to ask another audience question. How do you manage all your passwords? Really curious to hear from all of you. In one stat, we found 17 of the 20 most common passwords can be cracked by cybercriminals in under 1 second. So, Billy, starting with you, what do you find to be the most common password faux pas?
Yeah, this is a great topic. I love this topic, but kind of mentioned this before. But the human is the weakest link in the attack chain. As human beings, it's understandable, right? Because it's human nature. We try to look for simple solutions to help with complex challenges. And when we look at passwords, some of the things that help me as a red teamer that I still see people doing in 2024, and I'm sure I'll see it in 2025 and 2026. One of the most common is using dictionary words in your password, right? Particularly taking something like your company name or maybe the month or the season, and then adding some numbers and maybe a special character at the end. Um, Not surprisingly, very common one is exactly what I said, to take your company name, add the year and an exclamation point. Or for companies that force password changes quarterly, spring, summer, fall, winter 2024 exclamation point. Those are ones that we always try and we have great success with, particularly when we can harvest a whole lot of usernames from previous data breaches and then spray those passwords across all of them. Typically, you're going to get one that lands, and then from there, you're either working to try to bypass 2FA or you have now some valid credentials to get you into an organization. Another one that we see a lot is password reuse. So your main sign-in logins may have very strict requirements for changing passwords, etc. But that doesn't mean that all of the other sites and portals that folks log into have those same requirements. So, you may have a password that I'm able to, for example, here, I'll back up just a second. For example, you may have a strict lockout policy for Active Directory. So if I'm trying a bunch of passwords, I get locked out, either geographically or whatever, and I'm not able to try a bunch and see if I can actually successfully get in. But if I now pivot and I find a web application that doesn't have those same lockout features, I can now spend a lot more time testing and spraying passwords. And if I get one that is valid, I may then be able to take that back to Active Directory and I may have discovered valid credentials. So again, password reuse across different platforms is a big one. And then the last one, and I beg of all of you, please don't do this, but still very frequently on red teams, one of the first things we'll do is just start looking at, once we gain access, we'll start looking at files that are stored on systems. And we still find, passwords.txt full of all of the passwords that person has for all of their things. Similarly, Sarah, you brought up, physical security. We also do physical penetration testing. It's no different if you're writing on a Post-it note and putting it under your keyboard, right? Your password is still not secure. It's still available for someone to take in the same way, even though it's on your system. So somebody would already have to be in, you may now be giving access to a whole bunch of more systems or applications that person wouldn't have had access to. So yeah, those are the big ones.
Yeah, we got to be careful. There are dictionary attacks, those password spraying attacks, all of these things. So, those very commonly used passwords or reuse passwords across all of your different accounts. Not a great idea. Also, the post it notes. Remember to clear your screen, take away those post it notes. We have to be mindful of the physical as well as the digital, the saving of passwords. Absolutely. And Max, I'm also interested in what you think about how password management is just as much of a business priority as it is an individual responsibility. What advice do you have for leadership when it comes to password management?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And also, we have a question from the audience, and that is companies that do provide cybersecurity training is typically once a year. Should it be more than this? And I think, yes, it absolutely needs to be more than that. Again, it needs to be timely and relevant. And I think, you can use your security awareness training to address new threats, new mechanisms, new security tools that you may be using. It doesn't necessarily have to be the traditional security awareness training that you see, with phishing training and everything else. You could use that as a mechanism to address other things that are involving your security program throughout the year. So I would say, yes, every year, absolutely have your normal security awareness training, but then either quarterly or semi-annually, have other training in there that's also timely and relevant to your employee population, and that also helps them stay engaged, and it helps keep security awareness top of mind, right? But to go to Sarah's question, I think really it comes down to Billy's point. What can we do as a leadership team to help the employees and help IT admins protect themselves, protect the systems, et cetera? And I think a lot of that can be done with security tooling. Technical enforcement of passwords, as Billy pointed out, is the easiest thing, right? No password reuse, use complex passwords. But as a CISO, there's things that we can do too from a technical perspective that can help out the employee base and/or IT admins or other privileged users, right? And that is using PAM tools that can automatically rotate passwords and service account passwords, which is something that's often overlooked. Service account passwords normally have privileges that a normal user isn't, so they're targeted quite often. So have a tool that automatically rotates those. Having an end user password management tool, right? That's corporate sponsored, that can store passwords and or create complex passwords for you and then save it in a password vault. That's probably one of the most important things that you can do as an end user, and that will absolutely help reduce password reuse and ensure that you are using a complex password that can't be guessed. And once we get down to it, I think the most important thing that we can do is implement passwordless, right? And I think the industry is starting to move that way. I'm currently using passwordless myself internally as a test case for Optiv, and I'll tell you, it's groundbreaking and it's fantastic from an end user perspective. And I really think that that's one of the things that, as an industry, we really need to start pushing is just getting away from passwords altogether, and just make it more hard for bad actors to break into systems. And this is one way to do it.
Max, I'm so glad that you brought up the passwordless conversation because I'm also interested in what kind of a passwordless future is looking like. I'm seeing quite a bit people are using biometric scanning and other authentication methods, and those are becoming more preferable to passwords. And we've talked about how there's a lot of human error that can be involved when we're trying to come up with our own passwords and make sure they're different and maintain them all. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Max, on how the evolutions and the passwordless security, how can that help us to think more about enhancing zero trust initiatives for our organization?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one tool in the toolbox for zero trust. Zero trust, as we all know, is a methodology and an architecture. And for me, I think the end user again is probably the softest target. To Billy's point, and I think we've touched upon that several times in this discussion so far. And so, if we can provide a tool that enables difficult MFA to break, then yeah, let's do it. And I'll be honest, it's anytime you have a password in there, there's going to be an opportunity for a bad actor to be able to crack that. It's hard to crack my face, right? So when you're using biometrics, it's very unique. And as an end user, I will tell you, having that frictionless authentication mechanism is fantastic, right? I hit a button on my phone, it does the facial recognition, and it logs me into the system, right? And it helps enable zero trust from a device and MFA standpoint, right? And it's the first step, I think, in the zero trust journey. It's one of those things that I think is frictionless. It's something that users want, they desire, and normally in the security world, you don't get something that users actually want, right? It's normally a hindrance. And in this case, if it's reducing users' authentication friction and it comes to a frictionless experience, it's fantastic. I mean, I log in using Face ID when I hit a button. When I go to SSO, I scan a QR code, and that's it, right? Like that's my login experience. It's fantastic. So I think as users find out more that that's a viable mechanism, and as CISOs find that it may not be as expensive as what people are expecting, and as it becomes more prevalent across industry, I think that it's just going to continue to get pushed.
Yeah, I mean, we love a frictionless experience, and it's interesting to think about, right, how if users are wanting this kind of experience, are we able to deliver and have, better experience and even more enhanced security with the kind of passwordless authentication and biometrics? Now, Billy, from your perspective, what do you see as the benefits of this, and can it help us to enhance zero trust and controls and mechanisms, or what are the risks that you can envision with the passwordless authentication as well?
Yeah, sure. So obviously the big benefit, right, is that it reduces some of those human aspects that we've been talking about, whether it's, dictionary words or password reuse. It prevents attackers from now trying to password spray or conduct dictionary attacks, et cetera, to try to get access to systems. Those are the benefits. On the risk side, I think it's important to remember that we don't assume that passwordless will solve all your problems, right? It still has to be part of a layered defense in depth strategy, because just like MFA, attackers will pivot, and rather than trying to guess your passwords, now they're going to be trying to trick you into some way of giving them access to an authenticated session where they can then take your token and reuse your token, right? Because once someone is authenticated, that session is good. We do the same for MFA now, which is why the approach to how you train folks to understand phishing and respond to phishing, like Max is doing now, it's so important, because that forces attackers, in the MFA world, it forces us to focus on getting authenticated session tokens. So if I can still phish you and I can still get an authenticated token, there's still a risk there and it's still hackable. But if you layer these things, right, passwordless with strong cybersecurity awareness training, with the technical controls, URL filtering, all those kind of things, right, then you become pretty formidable and it becomes much harder for an attacker. So yeah, definitely the risk there being that it's not a solution to save everything, but it is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and Billy, if I can add on too, we talked about zero trust briefly, and I think, to Billy's point, zero trust is all about a layered defense. It's about least privilege. It's about making yourself a hard target, and then when people do get into your network through a phishing attack or something of that sort, you're limiting their horizontal movement, right? And you really have to kind of look through your entire architecture, as Billy was stating, and think about zero trust as an architecture and zero trust as a methodology, and where can you close those gaps? Because I'll tell you, blast radius and attack path analysis is something that is an industry buzzword right now, but it's a reality that we have to start thinking about as a security professional. Because honestly, at some point an attacker is going to get in your network. It's not that everybody's foolproof. Something will happen. And when it does, are you prepared to limit that individual's use to and movement across your network to limit the damage that that person can do, and to limit that access that that person can do? And so this, we're talking about security awareness training and passwordless and some of these other things, but as a security professional, we need to look at the entire security stack and look at the entire network in its holistic nature. The end user is just one entry point. Once they get in, what can that bad actor do once they get in?
Yeah, I really like that vision of the defense in depth strategy. There's no one tool or one solution that is the one and done type of tool. We really have to have that layered defense. If we think of that kind of castle image, and we can't invest everything right at the perimeter. There's so many different checks that are going up to the castle that we have to make sure that there are a lot of steps and controls in the process. Great points. And so I want to turn to the chat, the audience, and see what you have shared. So, other than security training per se, what are your best recommendations for follow up actions leveraging lessons learned?
All right, I guess I'll go first. Follow-up actions and leveraging lessons learned, I think is, again, taking constant feedback from your user base is probably the best way that you can take lessons learned on security awareness training, et cetera. But anytime you have an incident, do an after action report, right? It's the best way to learn from your own mistakes, right? And I think that's probably the best way that you can really do follow-up actions for anything, right? Do an after action report, identify your gaps, make improvement plans. And in fact, I think in an hour here, I'm actually going to have an outbrief for our own internal exercise, right? and we're going to have an after action report on what we did well, what we didn't, and just look at it that way from from everything that happens within your security program. And that also is security awareness training. Maybe you're going to release something that doesn't work and the people hate, or they think it's boring, or they think it's maybe too hard, right? And too hard, it could be subjective, right? But we do get some of that feedback, including phishing simulations, right? Oh, these phishing simulations are too hard. It's like, well, that's what we're actually getting in Proofpoint or in your emails gateway as actual phishing emails. And I think you should be training the way that operations is getting the threats, right? You don't train on, misspelled emails, etc. That's too easy. You need to have the users train like we're getting threats, right? And so, again, I think really just getting constant feedback from the user base on how you can improve your security program. And I would say that's all the way up to the CEO. I think it's important for senior leadership to be involved too, and to give you that feedback as to whether or not they think that it's being relevant and timely for them as well. And I think I didn't talk about this earlier, but I think I should have added it. And that is, when you're talking about timely and relevant, that also includes the different user groups within your employee base. So finance should be getting different phishing test emails than, say, a security engineer or a software tester, right? I think there's different use cases that you should be attacking from different directions. I specifically target IT admins, finance, marketing. The EO even gets specific phishing emails. And I think it's important to tailor your training, including phishing simulations, to the user groups that exist within your organization.
Yeah, I love the focus on the continual improvement and receiving feedback and always having follow up actions where you're saying what went well, what are people saying, how can we iterate. I know that our training at Optiv has iterated a lot since I've been here, and it's great to see, again, how dynamic it is and how we're always learning. And we also got a question in the chat. What are some end user password management tools you'd recommend? These can be not necessarily vendor specific, but any types of tools.
Billy, you want to hit this one, or do you want me to?
You go ahead. I use one, but I don't know that it's the best. So
Yeah, and I think what's important on that question is that you just use something that's supported and is from a reputable place, right? Don't use something that some guy generated, for a college projects as a final project, right? Use something that is truly supported. Even if it's open source, it's okay to use an open source tool as long as it's well supported, it's backed by independent testing, etc. Other than that, I mean, there's several vendors out there, right, that have password managers that you can use, and the majority of them are pretty good, right? From a corporate perspective, CyberArk has one, Workforce Password Management. There's other companies that also sell them as a part of packages that integrate well with their platform. What I will say though is, don't use Chrome Password Manager. Don't use browser-based password managers. Use one that's independent, that you can store your passwords in, and that is portable. And I think a lot of people forget the portability aspect because, if you can't export those, you're going to have to hand jam in if you change your password manager. So just, keep those things in mind and understand that I think from a CISO perspective, I'm trying to keep the password managers that we use for work and the password managers we use for personal use are separate. And, when you have your one for home use, again, just make sure that it's, a legit password manager that's fully supported and independently tested. And I think you'll be fine.
Yeah, this is great advice. I did want to ask one more question before we wrap up, and it's thinking really about the theme of our talk today about how everyone in the organization can get involved in cybersecurity awareness. And Billy, when you're engaging with clients or advocating for better risk management and mitigation guidance, what strategies do you think are most essential to communicate to the C-suite and throughout the organization?
yeah, that's a great question. We've talked about some of them kind of throughout, right? And the first one that I always go with is looking at it from that risk perspective. I'm very fortunate in the sense that I get to do testing where it's very easy to demonstrate risk, because if I have success, then an attacker can have success in the same way. So I always go back to describing the risk of not making the change. Max brought up a great point. Like I always am listening for two things. One is, if I hear people say that's the way we've always done it, then I know that that's dangerous, right? Because it means they're not changing at the right speed. And then the second one is, oh, that's really hard for us to do. Um, Not saying I'm not empathetic or sympathetic to those, right? I do understand that things are hard, but one example that Max brought up was the use of service account passwords and ensuring that Pam is changing those, et cetera. Countless times I'll tell you that, we've had luck in what's called Kerberoasting, which is getting, the hashes for service accounts. And then we go to crack them and there's 10 or 15 service accounts that are all using the same password that was set 10 years ago. So again, I know that's hard to make those changes, but it's dangerous to get into that line of thinking of that's the way we've always done it, or that's too hard. The second, right, is understanding that there's a constant evolution of attack and defense. So even if you make a change today and you get pen tested or have a red team later in the year, you're probably going to see a different approach, and it's a never-ending game of identifying vulnerabilities, making a risk decision on what the risk of not fixing those vulnerabilities is, and then moving forward with either fixing them or not. And then lastly, this kind of came up already as well, but it's that mindset of continual improvement, right? Our security may not be exactly where we want it today, but we're going to continue to make changes. We're going to continue to train our workforce. We're going to continue to get better. And we're going to continue to ask people that are not criminals to test us so that we can learn before we actually, have a breach. So that was the last point, really, is just test regularly, right? There's always ongoing changes. Max, I'm sure we're making changes to our environment every week. Obviously, we can't test every week to validate that those changes didn't create new risks, but having a regular testing schedule of either penetration testing or red teaming, depending on where you are in your maturity as an organization, as a security organization, but repeatedly testing to find new vulnerabilities and to fix them is important.
Yeah, you have to test and continually get that data in order to learn and improve. That's something that has really been a theme of this conversation. And it's also interesting to think about how, when we talk about security training and all these lessons that we're learning, the theme of this month is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, but I think we've also addressed ways that we can turn that awareness into action, and how all of these different strategies that we leverage, whether it's the testing or the changing your passwords, all of these small, seemingly small steps, but they're making a big difference. And even if we fail that phishing test or whatnot, if we keep getting tested on it and we get more alert and better each time, then we really make a difference, and we build a more secure culture. So, with that, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Are there any final thoughts about building a cybersecurity culture and a strong culture of awareness and action? If not, Billy and Max, I want to thank you so much for your time, and thank you for providing tips and tricks for enhancing cybersecurity awareness. And thank you and the audience for sharing your tips as well as your questions. It was so great to be able to read those live and see how we're all involved. Again, the theme is It Starts With You. And I think that we've really seen that in how we all, from all different areas of the business, get involved to help enhance cybersecurity awareness. So to learn more about cybersecurity consulting that fits your needs, please connect with us at optiv.com and subscribe to our newsletter. It's called The Cyber Landscape on LinkedIn. And our most recent edition features resources to enhance cybersecurity awareness. So that's a great read. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you for joining.
Thank you.